Top of the evening to you, Africa, and thank you for joining us on Report Desk Africa today. It's a hot Thursday afternoon here in Lagos, Nigeria. I do hope you have a favorable weather wherever you are. I am Ni Omoni, and of course, I don't do this alone.
And blessings, Masugu. We're so grateful to have you join us for wherever you're watching us from across the African continent. Now, this is a program where we give you an extensive review of every report we have been keeping tabs on for you during the course of the week. And of course, today we will be looking at two major issues. Our conversation will be centered around events in the West and the Southern Africa, which is Nigeria, and of course, South Africa precisely, with issues ranging from devastating effects of flooding in Nigeria to the US issuing terror alerts in both countries, talking about South Africa and, of course, Nigeria. So do not go anywhere. We will be right back with more details of these stories. In case you're just joining us, this is the Report Desk Africa, the program where we give you insight into every report we have been keeping tabs on right here on News Central Television. Now, today we'll be starting in Nigeria, where recent videos of flooding in different parts of the country has got everyone talking, particularly with the viral scenes from Bayelsa. There's also that from Kogi State in Lokoja, in the north-central part of the country. Now, Bayelsa is in the south-south region of Nigeria as well, and many Nigerians have been lending support to the victims of this unfortunate event. Now, we understand from the statistics that over 1.4 million people have been displaced from their homes, suffering the dire effects of this. We also understand that over 2,776 people have been injured, and unfortunately, 612 people have lost their lives to this unfortunate incident. Now, we know that people have been lending support to the victims of the incident by calling on government and private agencies to rise to the challenge and also assist the affected persons. Now, before we go further, we have a report that has been packaged by News Central's Bernard Akede, who shed more light on the situation. Please take a listen.
Wading through flood waters with his niece on his back while singing Michael Jackson's Heal the World, this viral video of Etievie Clarkson Kikile from Bayelsa State, South Nigeria, melted the hearts of many.
People dying, if you care enough for the living, make a better place for you and for me.
The past 1 month has seen several states in Nigeria battle severe flooding, the kind that has not been seen in about a decade. Millions have been displaced, while hundreds have lost their lives, according to reports. Some victims of the flooding feel this disaster is not getting the desired attention and have called on the government and other agencies to come to their aid. Recently, Bola Ahmed Tinubu and Peter Obi, presidential candidates of the All Progressives Congress and the Labour Party, donated 100 million naira and 5 million naira respectively to flood victims, while the United States government has offered to pay $1 million to the country to help with the immediate needs of the people affected.
We are filled with grief for the flood victims who have lost so much, livelihoods, homes, and even loved ones. Millions are displaced and face the risk of cholera and other waterborne diseases. The road to rebuilding is not going to be easy, but the United States will be there alongside you, the people of Nigeria, at this difficult time.
But one huge scare is the destruction of farmlands and farm animals and the effect that this might have on food production in the very near future.
The impact of climate change is now being felt heavily in most African countries. And in Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation, the fear is that if nothing is done soon enough concerning this recent flooding, there just might be a food crisis in Nigeria. Bernard Akede, reporting for News Central.
So sad. Streets that are meant to be plied by vehicles now being walked on by canoes, and road transportation now becoming water transportations. Farmland destroyed, people losing properties and even lives, as you can see there. People risking their life just to cross over to the other side, not even knowing if they are crossing over to the other side. Well, we have a bumper session for this particular topic, and we'll be joined by none other by our own correspondent. We have Mayowa Daramola, who is a Nigerian journalist, who will be joining us, and we have Linda, who has firsthand experience and firsthand meeting with some of these affected people in Anambra. And of course, one of the affected person, Chris Ikijo, who is a resident in Delta. Good to have you all on the show.
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, Chris. Mayowa, are you there? Just kindly confirm. Okay, Chris, let's start with you. You have firsthand witness and experience this thing, and I know I really cannot understand how you feel, but help us understand the gravity of this flood in your area.
So I'm a victim because I live in Patani, and it's a border town between Delta and Bayelsa, right on the river Fakados, which is one of the branches, tributary of the River Niger. So what's happening in the last 10 years has been that we woke up suddenly and found out that about this time every year, intermittently, with some break between 2012 and now, we've experienced flooding of different magnitude. Unfortunately, this year's magnitude is the highest, of which most people are overwhelmed. And I'm sure that it's supposed to be a national emergency. You just invest all your life building and then setting up businesses and then thinking you have a home at home. And then this flood comes in and then ravaging and take everything that you've ever worked for. Everything. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, because the entire landmass of local governments, 10 in Delta and 6 in Bayelsa, are underwater. Now, not just small flood water volumes that can be described as oceanic, because if you walk in it and you're not careful, you could drown. The east-west road is being washed off in certain weak sections. Bridges, culverts are overwhelmed by this flood. And then the worst part of it, those who have invested in local fish ponds, local animal husbandry are badly affected. You're talking about your life, so you're not able to save plants and animals. So what we're experiencing now is a complete cut off from livelihood. People can go to work, people can go to school, people can find hospitals to attend to their needs, people can find markets, food crops destroyed, homes destroyed. It's even more saddening when you find out that there are some people who have built their lives around mud houses, which is their pride and their dignity, and those houses are already dissolved in water. So at the end of this flood, some of us who have brick buildings probably will find abandoned brick buildings that are now for reptiles, but those guys will not find anything because even the zincs would have been peeled further away. So there'll be homelessness in the next couple of days as water begins to recede, and it will take a long time for people to recover from the shock and then probably start going back to farm. Already there is fuel scarcity, there's no electricity, there's no potable drinking water, there's no medical care, and then the hula bula about food supply. There's no food supply in most of these places as I speak with you. People in IDP camps are yet to get the impact of what they're overwhelmed. I'm not sure the state government is doing enough. I don't know why. Maybe they don't have the resources. I'm also not sure that the federal government has responded accordingly, as we've seen in other climes where when flood of this magnitude presents themselves with citizens, government come in to help. So we have the capacity. This is the region where the oil is from, particularly in the Niger Delta. So investing oil money to ensure that we're safe shouldn't be a bad venture. You can hear also that there's a cut in the LNG because their gas plant is underwater, they can't operate it. So this flood is a national calamity. And I think that people here we're already poor. We're already poor because we're marginalized, we have no opportunities. And then those who have managed to earn a living are now facing strong devastation because they don't even know where to start from. So government must come in, not just about providing palliative and relief materials and maybe helping resettle people, but to ensure that engineering methods or water science methods are carried out to make sure that this flood is managed. It's not something that is not manageable. It's something that over the years as a country, we did not pay attention to the river patterns and then the river development and movement. So we allowed it to get silted to the point where there are sandbanks everywhere. In Lokoja, for instance, you can walk across that confluence by foot, even in the peak of the water, except in this flooding era. In my village, as a small child, when we were there, you could take a leap from the river side bank into the river that is far low below sea level. Today, what we have is that the whole of that bottom is filled up with sandbanks, and communities are not able to evacuate that by themselves. So there must be deliberate investment in dredging of the River Niger, River Benue, and then creating artificial sandbanks and possibly dikes to allow for water control systems. And there must be deliberate effort to build dams. Now, for me, all these investments are not also going to be wasted. If you take sand dredging, for instance, a lot of sand there could be useful for glass production. Some of them could be useful for infrastructure. So, and then they can create local wealth for local people in terms of employment and job creation. So it's not wasted. Deliberately, the government must invest and create jobs through that means. And then if you build dams, you can use them for hydroelectric power because we even don't have electricity in the first instance. But we have a country where we keep procrastinating until when there's this kind of emergency, then they come and they buy rice and they buy Indomie and they share to people three packs of Indomie, a bucket of beans, as if that's what people are feeding on. Even the
Most
poorest
definitely.
of people.
Right, Chris, apologies for that. And I really, really would like to apologize for what you're going through. I mean, one can only imagine the effect, the disastrous effect that it's had on Bayelsa State and even in Lokoja. Unfortunately, that is my hometown. And I know so many places that I usually apply when I visit there has been flooded, like the Ganaja Junction, even the road linking Lokoja to Abuja. So a lot of people have suffered the dire effects of this. Now, I would like to ask Linda this question. I know that you run an NGO, and I understand that you visited some of the displaced victims. Now, we see on social media and so many videos making the rounds that some of these victims do not even have access to running water, like Chris just mentioned. And the only option they have now is the stagnant flood water. And that's what they use for drinking. That's what they use for bathing. And that's what they use for cooking. And this has raised concern, especially with humanitarian agencies and health agencies, as to the spread of cholera, especially because we know that there was an outbreak of cholera. And if there is a further outbreak or further spread, it's going to be disastrous, talking about the health of a country. Now, I would like to hear your own take as to what you have experienced, what you've seen from the places you have visited so far.
Okay, thank you very much. I've been to a lot of communities in Anambra North, which is one of the areas that are mostly affected by the flood. So what I noticed is that even in these IDP camps, these places where these people were supposed to have been evacuated to safety, you notice that these buildings are surrounded by stagnant water. They are surrounded by this stagnant water that has so many algae and spirogyra growing on them. So it is true that in the nearest, very soon, there will be an outbreak of likely cholera or other waterborne diseases. And when I went to some of these camps, these people, they were waiting for people, NGOs, to bring water, something like sachet water to them, because they cannot pump water in these areas because for over a month now, for over 6 weeks, they've removed everything, electricity in these areas have been disconnected to avoid electrocution, I presume. So these people cannot, even when there is pipe boreholes, they cannot pump water because there is no electricity. And most of these IDP camps were not originally designed for people to live in. Some of them are just town halls. So they do not even have any provision for water. Now these people are forced to bathe with this flood water. Some of them defecate in this same flood water. So it is a very messy situation, if you ask me, based on the things I saw in Obaru local government. This is one of the places I visited.
Linda, let me just quickly hold you up on that before I go to Mayowa to get his own view of these. You mentioned that they've been able to remove the electricity cables, but the issue is pumping water. Has there been, at any point, do you witness any sort of intervention from the government to all any of these IDP camps or to any of these affected victims?
Mostly what the government does is to provide these camps. They provide space for people to go and stay. When it comes to the day-to-day running of these camps, these people have to figure it out themselves. And once in a while, they bring food and, and it's mostly food that people bring to them. So nobody, even sleeping materials, they do not have these things. So the government they don't provide water or go into the details or nitty-gritty of making sure that these people have access to clean water.
Mayo, I'm sure you're not new to this because you've been covering Nigerian stories quite a while, and I'm sure flooding is not new to you. But this is quite peculiar because it affected a lot, and compared to other floodings that have happened in Nigeria, these has caused more damage than those ones. This is where I'm going to. A lot has been affected. The Minister of Water Resources came out to say, okay, it's an act of God. the Nigerian government say, okay, we are having a 90-day ultimatum to develop a plan, knowing that in Nigeria, all these things take processes because you need to develop the plan, then you need to process the plan, then not now talk of implementation of this plan. Do you see politics in play here? Are we seeing politics in play here?
To be very honest, this sort of like has been the body language of the government from like since we all know, right? I wouldn't want to call it politics. However, I would call it just their attitude where they do not care about people. Just like you said, presidency has come out to say 90 days. So in 90 days, that's when we would have a plan. So how many more persons are going to lose their lives within now and the next 90 days? There is no conversation about that. We are in a place where we're used to doing things after the problem has come to play. Because I know sometime last year and even 2 years ago, NIMET made noise about this. There will be heavy rainfall, there will be flooding in 2022, but nobody paid attention. I mean, we can see now, nobody paid attention to whatever reports NIMET had released before now. So it goes a long way to show that government really do not care about people, right? Somehow I feel like they allow these things to happen so they can get intervention funds from other countries. I mean, they're beginning to get them, so maybe that's the goal at the end of the day. But it's just it's annoying, to know that there were warnings about these things before now, and we still allowed it to get to this point. And then that's when we're looking for 90 days. That's 3 months before we can now come up with a plan. So it means if we've lost 300 people, we should get ready to lose another 300 or even more people before we now have a plan. Now, don't forget that the plan, we're not even sure how long it will take to implement this plan. So it's appalling.
I mean, Maya, we've seen that there are some seemingly ridiculous date and deadlines right there. And like you said, the president has given 90 days. And the ministers, the government came out to say that this is not a problem that can be solved immediately, which is obvious. It's going to take nothing less than 30 years to fix it. But my question is, do you think that there is a short-term plan that can at least get these people to those in the IDP camps now, get them to a safe place where they can at least be catered for? Now, we know that the government has sent out relief products or things to 21 states, but do you think that will suffice?
Well, to be very honest, I don't think that's enough. Again, going back to the fact that there were warnings about these things, I feel like if we put the same energy we put in when it was COVID, we'll be able to handle this issue a little more better, right? So during COVID, even states that were not yet affected had preparations. They had places where they would quarantine people. Now it's coming to flood. Nobody seems to be saying anything. People are just waiting till it's bad, till people are dying before we begin to now start building IDP camps and we start waiting to send relief materials to these people. I don't think that's what we ought to be doing, right? There are other ways, there are faster ways that you could get these things, that you could get results with things like this. What's the evacuation plan for these people? What other places can we take these people to in the meantime? Some of these people are even cut out from reality, like the road is already flooded, so you can't even access them. From the last time I checked, some of these places you have to use helicopter to get to them, to give them the relief materials. What is the plan going forward? What happens to people who you can still access them? Why leave them there? Why not take them away to a place where they are safer, right? So I feel like there are short-term plans that we can do. I may not be able to spell out what to do, but definitely there are other things that can be done. States that have not been affected so badly should begin to look for ways to evacuate people. For example, Lagos State now, they're giving warning to people on the island and some part of the mainland that they should evacuate. Evacuate to where?
Really?
Speaking of short-term plan, I know Chris is at the forefront of this and he knows where this hurt. And he should be able to tell us at least what exactly would make life a little better. Before he answers that, I'm of the concern that there was a time when we were talking about government intervention and what the state will get or gets to benefit from crisis situation like this. I remember during the COVID-19 when we were talking about relief materials, when people were donating to states in terms of relief material from outside the country and even locally. Weeks, months, years later, we're finding these relief materials in warehouses. Chris, are there signs that the states might have intentionally ignored the warnings? Because the federal government claims it sent out warning. There's signs that it might have intentionally, ignored this warning and signals just to benefit something. And what would really make life easier? Because outrightly we can't say this is what can solve all the situation. What would make life easier for the victims there in your location?
All right, thank you very much. So we have to put things in the right perspective. It's almost impossible to move people from, for instance, 10 local governments to another local government. It's almost very impossible because that's where they've been all their life. Relocating them will create a new kind of conflict because definitely it means they're going to be upstaging other people in their homes. And then that may just become their new homes, and then there'll be land grabbing issues and a new kind of conflict. Now, this pattern of flooding has to do with human negligence, with working with the appropriate kind of geographical expression as it has to do with our country. We're not prepared for it. In Netherlands, for instance, when they had flooded, designed gate control dams that help them manage their water. So in the short term, what she said, Linda, I guess what she said was very correct. People now need to survive. So she's talking about cholera. It's happening already. My NGO is on the east-west road with 3 canopies because I had to move my community clinic that I was running into the streets that we now manage healthcare from 2 states because they are cut off completely from government. They can't even access healthcare. So while there, the last time I sent in drugs, I had to go by boat because there's no access. What government needs to do, my concern is that, like you said, all these relief items that are donating to state governments, people the managers of those projects would divert those things to certain warehouse for future use for themselves or to be sold by their cronies. That's what we saw in the NSAS, and the COVID era. And I've said that this is even worse than COVID. In COVID, for instance, you were forcefully made to stay home. You had a home. The problem is you could not go out to look for work. Here, you have no home. You can't even go out. So, and then there's going to be outbreak of multiple kind of diseases that we cannot check. There's diarrhea already on the rising because I sent in cartons of IV fluid and ORS recently just to make sure that we stabilize children who are highly dehydrated because of diarrhea and vomiting. There's malaria outbreak. So insecticide treated nets will be needed. Blankets because they are sleeping outside. What they call IDP camps are just makeshift zinc houses or schools that they thought would not be flooded. Some of those IDP camps now themselves are flooded. So you can't even take those relief materials by road to those places. In our area, for instance, you could survive using those big local boats or low draft barges. In some areas, like she said, you have to fly over, hover around with overcraft and get there to drop items. The problem is that intergovernment agencies and all those international agencies want to deal with governments. They sometimes undermine the NGOs on ground that should do the work. They pass through these government agencies, and then these people mismanage the process. I'm aware as I speak now that there's hunger in certain camps, not because state governments have not released certain funds for those things, just because the managers are now applying a lot of bureaucracy to slow it down so they keep the money. Just like they have said, now let's plan. We could have planned for this in 2012, or in 2018, or in 2019 when we had the flood. We didn't plan. This is 2022. As soon as the flood is over, we'll put that plan on the table again, and then we'll back to where we're going. What do the people need now? High grounds. And then, of course, the Nigerian engineering system must begin to design the kind of houses that we will have on rafters or possibly on pillars that will be above water level. And these are riverine people. We are riverine people, for instance. So we have to find a way, because I wonder how you're going to move 6 local governments of Bayelsa State to which state? River State or Delta State? Or take 10 local governments of Delta State to where? So we must design homes that are higher, and then we must find a way to find housing policies that is human friendly, such that common men can afford to own those kind of homes. So when there's flood, just go.
Okay, Chris, now we have been talking on a general note, and I would also like to mention that we see people on social media trying to make light of a situation, but we know how serious it is. So I'm going to ask you on a personal level, how has it been for you? How have you been faring?
Well, in my case is that, okay, so I have a little 20-room guest house for the community where I use for business. I have a community clinic out there, about a 10-bed hospital that I use to support the community, because government hospitals generally in those localities are really not functional most of the times. Of course, my own home, my own country home is there. Now, all those are underwater. Now, when the flood started, most of us had assumed that is the perennial kind of flooding, so we barely lift those things above ground level to certain levels of table levels, and then only for you to find out that the water volume is at that level. You now can't take your furniture out because they have to go underwater. You keep pushing it up until you are stuck in. And that's how some people drowned. So for me, it's a colossal loss. I'm not thinking about myself. Somehow I would slowly put things together. I'm just scared for those who may not even have where to return to at the end of this flood. I'm scared for women. In the camp clinic that I've made now, we've had 6 childbirths, 6 deliveries, a twin, and then four different women coming in. If we were not there, how were they going to manage? I'm just bothered that the government seemed to be complacent about its citizens in the security axis, in welfare axis, in just how to make sure that people, common people, which is the primary reason for governance, is done. As I speak with you, most state governments are still aloof as to what to do.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. I quite understand you. Linda, let me just quickly get your final take on this. We're looking at poverty. We're looking at diarrhea. We're looking at cholera, monkeypox, malaria, crop destruction, a lot more things to come, and even food and health crisis in the coming year if nothing is done, because some of the farms that produce the food for the economy to thrive have been affected, and even people who are supposed to farm on those places, some of them have lost their lives, and as you said, some of them are still even trying to get back on their feet. What is the way forward? There were drainages, there were dams. What could we do to ensure that moving forward we get these things right? And for the people who are already affected, what can we do? In few seconds, if you can do that for us.
People affected, these are mostly farmers, because the places in Anambra State where I visited, they are predominantly farmers and fishermen. So I think their farms are already submerged. I think government should start immediately and look for ways to maybe set them up, give them startup money, set them up with funds to start up again, because they've lost everything. We're not even talking about what they've lost on the home front. This is their means of livelihood. They've lost all that. And we're not just talking about farms. Markets are submerged with the goods in them. So I think the government needs to set out a fund, as much as you're setting out money for catering for them now that they are in the camps. I think they should set out money on ways to help them financially to get back on their feet. Then in terms of the diseases, I think if we're going to lose a lot of lives, especially that of young children, if nothing is done about these diseases that are already spreading in these IDP camps. This is as a result of poor hygienic and zero organization in these camps.
Okay, thank you, Linda. But because of our time, Linda, if you can hear me, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but because of our time, I would like to ask Mayowa for his final take in a few seconds.
So yeah, after all said and done, I feel like this is the right time when we need to put everybody together and find what works. Other countries have had to face challenges like this and they've been able to overcome it. I think we just need to pick pieces from these people and find out what we can also do independently to save these lives. Most importantly, it's the life of these people that matters. Not even the food you give to them now, not even the 90 days you're setting out aside to make an intervention plan. We need to find a way to get these people out of there, or at least save their lives in the time being.
Life over food, because when there's life, there's hope. You need to be alive to be able to at least.
Most definitely.
Thank you very much, guys, for joining us on the show. We really appreciate you, and you've helped shed more light to these things. And hopefully, the federal government implements some, if not all, of these interventions that you've mentioned. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're still live with us on Report Desk Africa. This is a program where we run through every report we have been trailing for you in the course of the week. Now, earlier on, we talked about the flooding in Nigeria, and it really is a very disastrous situation, seeing how people are suffering the effects of the flood in Nigeria. Now, we will be switching gears now to security matters, where the United States government recently alerted both Nigeria and South Africa on the planned conduct of an attack targeting large gatherings of people at an unspecified location. Now, in Nigeria, the alert mentioned the country's capital, Abuja, while for South Africa, it was specifically in the Greater Sandton area of Johannesburg. However, the government of Nigeria and that of South Africa have reacted, and we have the clips of what they had to say. Take a listen.
It was quite unfortunate that the U.S. government issued that type of warning without having had deep dive type of discussions with us. But following that, we were able to engage them and to get to understand precisely where this warning or information has come from. We are in the course of doing precisely that, because warnings such as those do send a lot of panic amongst our people, and South Africans should be best informed by the South African government, our agencies as they are getting better at their job of securing our people, are alert and are looking very closely.
But I want to reassure both citizens, non-Nigerians, Nigerians living in this country, that the security agencies are on top of this matter. Of course, the terrorists would not stop to try to embarrass or intimidate government. But what I'm saying is that this country is safe. And there's no cause for alarm, no cause to panic. Unfortunately, that travel advisory of Sunday, many schools were closed, shops were closed, travel plans were disrupted. We don't need it. The security, our soldiers, our police are working round the clock to curtail any terrorist attack. That's all. That's always, and that's why. And this is where we stand.
Well, President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa says that he would have expected that, the South African government would have been informed before that print was sent out. Meanwhile, Lai Mohammed of Nigeria says that they are on the top of the situation. I mean, the terrorists would not try to stop, but then they have it covered. Now, in video making rounds on social media, we see that both in South Africa and in Nigeria, some US citizens are actually leaving both countries. Anyways, we have Candice Bailey, our South Africa correspondent, and of course we have our correspondent here in Nigeria, Dapo Adegboye, who will be here to help us dissect the issue. Thank you so much, lady and gentlemen, for joining.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, let's quickly go into the meat of this, okay? We've had a lot of terrorist attack in West Africa, Nigeria precisely, but as compared to South Africa, it is, I would say, a terror-free zone, not as much as Nigeria has witnessed over the years. Why are these signs coming in now? Because Nigeria and South Africa are the two major African countries that have received this signal at this time. I'll start with you, Candice. Why do you think these warnings are coming in now? What is different? What's happening?
Good evening, and thanks for having me on the show. It is really hard to explain exactly why we are getting a threat of a terror attack in South Africa at the moment. If you look at the US government's website, they issue an annual terror alert on all the countries that they have a presence in. And you would have noted that in 2020, they said it was quite a quiet year. There were no terrorism incidents in South Africa, and they attributed it to COVID. So why that has changed in the last 2 years, we don't know. What we do know is that there were at least three events that were planned, two events that were planned for this weekend, and another political event that is currently underway. So the political event that I'm talking about are really the Ethiopian peace talks that are being facilitated by South Africa. Now, we're not sure where those peace talks are taking place. I would imagine that they would be taking place in Pretoria, in our capital city. But those Ethiopian peace talks are happening as we speak. Now, we are not sure how they are linked to these terror attacks, if there is even a link, but it is obviously the Ethiopian situation has been a concerning one. So that might be a link to that. On the other side, there are two events that were happening in Sandton this weekend. One is a Pride LGBTQ. Now, the
LGBTQ.
A lot of alphabet.
It twists my tongue all the time. Well, the LGBTI community have an annual march. They call it a Pride March, and it usually takes place in the Sandton city. Now, they were planning on having it in the capital city of Sandton. Now, it's quite a busy, Sandton is quite a busy district. It's a business district. It's also a residential district. But there's generally a section of Sandton that they have this march at. Now, Initially, there was a concern that this march was going to be postponed due to the terror attack, but the community, well, the organizers of the event have said that they're going to go ahead. Now, just very briefly, before I take up too much time, the second event that was going to take place this weekend is a comedy festival that's linked to a comedian, Nick Rabinowitz, who is of Jewish descent. Now, the South African media have been speculating that this might have also been a potential target of the terror attacks, but we obviously have no such confirmation, official confirmation from the state.
Okay, I'm going to go to Dakwa, but before that, let me ask you this question, Candice. Now, looking at all the events you have mentioned, would we say that these are mere speculations? Let me use the LGBTQ, for example. Now, we know that the leaders of South Africa, it is no news that they have answered questions time and time again regarding the LGBTQ and their stand as to, you know, whether they allow it in South Africa or not. And we've heard them countless times that it's not one thing that they are bothered about in South Africa. I mean, there was a recent interview where one of the leaders also said that it is not their major concern right now, but it doesn't mean that it's allowed. So looking at all that, do we think, would you say that the United States is just, you know, merely speculating that because this might actually just trigger something that they may not be pleased about, they're issuing an alert for their citizens to evacuate?
Seriously.
Or do you think that because I'm trying to understand how the United States got such an intel and then the South African government didn't know, and then, you know, the print was just issued out and the South African government is just getting to see it. So there's a bit of a confusion there.
So first of all, I think it's very important to note that the South African government is definitely not a homophobic government, and that we have really embraced our LGBTI community holistically. However, I do think that the concern is maybe not that it's a result of the event, but I think that, you know, the event was going to have quite a significant amount of people. The LGBTI Pride March attracts thousands of people. So there is a concern that such a big event was going to be happening with a terror alert that's been taking place, and that there is potentially a lot of people that could have been injured if something did happen in Sandton, as has been predicted by that terror alert. There may not be a link, and obviously our security forces, as the president is saying, our security forces are probably checking it out, but as the organizers of the event have said, they've not received any official communique from the government to say, let's not go ahead with this event because there's a potential concern here. But I just think that there's a concern that if something did happen, people, you know, there might be a large crowd of people that might be, you know, might fall victim to something.
Okay, let me bring in Dakwa. Do you feel that the fears of the United States government are valid? I mean, looking at South Africa and Nigeria, generally we see, like Lai Mohammed said, this is not the first time, it's not the second time. So definitely terrorists will try to attack a lot of times. So it's not like they issued a very elaborate warning that everybody saw. So do you think their fears are actually valid to ask their citizens to evacuate or be careful?
All right, let me start by saying that the responsibility of embassies and consulates around the world, aside visa processes and the likes, is also to give security advisory, particularly to their citizens resident. So more often than not, they might have security intel and they just feel that, look, it's our civil right or it's our civil responsibility to let our citizens know what might happen, should it happen, in the state or the country they are resident in. So what the U.S. has done, the U.S. Embassy has done, is not out of place, honestly, right? That said, let's look at their travel advisory compared to the reality we have in Nigeria. You and I know, I mean, it's almost a no-brainer. We hear of attacks every day. Now, it's so funny that the attacks these days, you know, is not based on class. Because as the poor is being affected, we've also seen major attacks, you know, on the reach. And we see it across social media. Just a few days ago, I mean, a very prominent man of God was almost assassinated. Aside from that, a senator in the East was also attacked. So when you put all of this together, you might want to say, to a very large extent, the concerns they have raised is pretty valid. I think instead of antagonizing, which I understand the angle of the government trying to douse panic and tension, I think what the government really needs to do is work hand in hand, you know, with the United States to see how we can, of course, avert these attacks. We really pray that we don't experience worse than what we have seen in the past few years or few weeks or even months. So for me, I think it's pretty valid, what the United States Embassy has put forward.
Dapo, thank you for that. I really understand what angle you're trying to come in from. But here's my question. Candice, Dapo, have we ever heard when the United States predicted an attack on the U.S. soil and they raised a travel advisory?
I have not. I have to be honest with you. I have not heard.
Dapo, have you heard anyone before?
The United States.
So this that's where my concern. That's where my concern is. That's where my concern is coming from.
The United States predict an attack on the U.S. soil.
No, that's where my own concern is coming from. So if you're issuing a travel advisory to your citizens that are living in another country and you've not even liaised, I don't know because I might not have all those information, and you've not liaised properly with the person, with the government, with authorities before releasing that, then you're going to raise panic. That's the concern.
It is the responsibility of the Nigerian consulate or embassy in whatever country it's resident in to also give security advisory. It's not just to approve visas and issue visas. It's more complex than that.
I get.
Right?
To give to the citizens all the authorities.
If the content of that advisory was directed to U.S. citizens resident, the same way you would expect my embassy, should I be in Iraq or Iran, to tell me, look.
Okay, so here's my question. Who is protecting the U.S. citizen in that country?
It's the responsibility of the U.S. government to protect their homeland security.
Candice, let me just hear your final words on this because we don't have much time. I hear your final words, then I come back to Dapo.
Okay.
I want to agree with my colleague in the sense that the U.S. government, and if you go onto the U.S. government's website, you will see that the U.S. government issues terror reports on every single country, and they do it on an annual basis. So if you look at the terror report that's been issued on South Africa from 2019 to date, you'll note that they say there hasn't been any incidents in 2020. They'll note that in 2016, the Terr0r brothers were arrested after raids in various parts of Gauteng, and then notes exactly what incidents they were linked to and the status of their trial. The U.S. government has been very systematic about identifying terror attacks and putting it out there. So I don't think that this was an isolated warning. I think that they do this on a regular basis, and that obviously there was a cause for concern. Nihi, the last thing that I do want to note is that we also have to remember that the South African intelligence agencies and the South African Secret Service has been known to be compromised at the moment. So our intelligence capabilities are limited at the moment. So it's potential, there is potential that, secret and intelligence services from other countries would be able to pick up a threat. And that we may not.
Okay, thank you so much, Candice. Because of our time, we would have loved to go back to Dapo to hear his thoughts, but we would not be able to do that. But thank you so much, Candice Bailey, and thank you so much, Dapo Adeboye, for joining us to discuss this. Now, quickly, we would like to have our correspondent, our in-house correspondent, Bettina Umweli, to give us the forecast. Like Bernard would say, want to look into our crystal ball and tell us what to expect for the coming week. Bettina, you have the floor.
Hi, Nee, and hi, Blessings. For this week's forecast, next week, we'll be looking at Ethiopia-Tigray war, the peace talks between the rebels from the Tigray region and the Ethiopian government. Secondly, we'll be moving on to something very interesting, and I say interesting because it is different from what we have been seeing on our screens. We'll be talking about the COP27 and how Egypt will be hosting it and what to expect from that event. And then finally, what we have to move on to is another very interesting topic because it is something that we really haven't seen properly in Africa. Now, the Kusile power station contract, former South African ESCOM chief executive, Mashala Koko, has been arrested alongside his 5 other people, including his wife and his stepdaughter. Now, they will be the first top executive of power utility to be brought before the court, and the state will capture charges. That's what we'll be looking at for next week, and it is a very interesting week, especially the last story coming from South Africa.
Thank you, Bettina. I'm more concerned about the COP27 though.
Honestly,
because,
I really am looking forward to seeing how it goes.
Exactly, with all of the flooding going on in
Nigeria and every other part of. Well, we look forward to all this.
I remember we had this conversation where we said that they've been having a series of meetings and
so
no change. But we're looking forward to seeing what the agenda will be this year. So thank you so much, Bettina.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, it's been an amazing session. It has been Report Desk Africa, where we give you the updates on every report we have been trailing for you here on News Central Television. My name is Blessings Masugu.
And I am Ni Omani.
Do have a lovely weekend.
Bye.